Fame promises a kind of protection. The money, the security teams, the drivers, the careful schedules built to keep a famous person safe from the world. None of it holds on the road. A car is a car. A wet curve, a drunk behind the wheel, a stranger turning across your lane, and the most recognizable person in the world becomes another statistic on a stretch of highway. The people in these stories were a princess, a movie star, an Oscar winner who became royalty, a rapper at the top of the charts, a comedian who screamed for a living. They came from different decades and different worlds. They all died the same ordinary way, suddenly and violently, in a moving vehicle. Here are 5 of the most disturbing deaths of celebrities who died in car accidents. It was just after midnight on August 31st, 1997, in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel beneath the streets of Paris, France. Diana, Princess of Wales, was 36 years old. She was, at that moment, the most photographed woman alive, and the photographers were the reason she was moving so fast. She had spent the evening at the Ritz with Dodi Fayed, the son of the hotel's owner. The plan was to slip out quietly. Shortly after midnight, the couple left through a back door of the Ritz to avoid the crowd of paparazzi waiting at the front. They climbed into the back of a hired black Mercedes-Benz S280. In the front passenger seat sat their bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones. Behind the wheel was Henry Paul, the hotel's acting head of security. None of the 4 people in the car were wearing seatbelts. The Mercedes pulled away, and the photographers gave chase on motorcycles and scooters. Paul drove hard to lose them, accelerating along the Cours Albert Werner toward the underpass at the Pont de l'Alma. The tunnel had a posted limit of about 31 miles per hour. By the time the Mercedes reached the entrance, it was traveling close to 65 miles per hour, more than double the limit. At the mouth of the tunnel, the Mercedes clipped a slow-moving white Fiat Uno. Paul lost control. The car swerved across the carriageway and struck the 13th concrete pillar holding up the roof of the tunnel, almost head-on, at full speed. The impact was catastrophic. Henri Paul and Dodi Fayed were killed where they sat, both of them in the front and rear on the left side, the side that took the worst of the collision. Trevor Rees-Jones, the only one of the 4 wearing nothing to restrain him, and yet the only one positioned to survive, was gravely injured but alive. He would remember almost nothing of the night. Diana was alive in the wreckage. She was conscious enough that those first on the scene heard her speaking, though her words were faint and confused. One of the first photographers to reach the wreckage would later describe her crumpled on the floor of the car, alive, her injuries not yet visible from the outside. Paramedics worked on her inside the ruined car and then moved her, slowly and carefully, the way French emergency protocol demanded, stabilizing her at the scene before transport rather than racing immediately to a hospital, a choice that would later be questioned and defended for years. She had suffered massive internal injuries to her chest. A tear to a major vessel near her heart was bleeding into her body faster than anyone could stop it. She went into cardiac arrest on the way to the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital. Surgeons opened her chest and tried for nearly 2 hours to restart and repair her heart. At 4 o'clock in the morning, they stopped. The Princess of Wales was pronounced dead. The investigation that followed found that Henri Paul had been legally drunk, with a blood alcohol level around 3.5 times the French limit, and that he had prescription drugs in his system. The official conclusion was blunt. A drunk driver, speeding to escape photographers, had lost control and killed 3 people, but the white Fiat Uno was never found. The car that the Mercedes had touched in the seconds before the crash vanished into the city and was never conclusively identified, despite an enormous search. That single missing vehicle became the seed of a decade of conspiracy theories of staged accidents and hidden hands, fed by the sheer impossibility that someone so famous could die in something so banal. For years, the questions would not settle. Diana's death came at a strange moment in her life. Recently divorced from the heir to the British throne, newly in love, hounded across 2 countries by photographers who followed her everywhere. To many people it felt impossible that a woman so watched, so guarded, so important, could simply die in a tunnel because a driver had too much to drink. The theories multiplied. Some pointed to the missing Fiat. Some pointed to the speed of the chase. Some refused to accept an accident at all. A long British inquest eventually examined all of it: the speed, the alcohol, the missing Fiat, the claims of plots, and the question of whether Diana might have lived had she been wearing a seatbelt. It returned to the same hard ground the French investigators had reached years before. Diana had been unlawfully killed by the reckless driving of the man behind the wheel and the pursuing drivers behind her. There was no conspiracy in the wreckage. There was only a fast car, a drunk driver, a concrete pillar, and the most famous woman in the world, gone before sunrise. It was the afternoon of September 30th, 1955, on a flat stretch of Highway 46 near the junction with Highway 41, close to the tiny town of Cholame, California. James Dean was 24 years old, and he was the most magnetic young actor in America. He had made only 3 films: Rebel Without a Cause, East of Eden, and Giant. 2 of them had not even been released yet. It was enough. He had already become the face of a restless new kind of American youth, beautiful and brooding and impossible to look away from. He was also obsessed with speed. Days earlier, he had traded up to a brand new Porsche 550 Spider, a low, light, fast silver racing car. He had a nickname painted on the back of it: Little Bastard. He had originally planned to tow the Porsche to the race on a trailer, but at the last minute he decided to drive it instead, to put some miles on the new engine before he raced it. He was heading to an amateur sports car event in Salinas, with his Porsche factory mechanic, Rolf Wuderich, riding in the passenger seat, and a small group following in another car behind. The drive had already had one warning. Earlier that afternoon, a highway patrolman had pulled Dean over and written him a ticket for speeding. In the late afternoon light, with the sun low over the open country, the Spider approached the highway junction. Coming the other way was a 1950 Ford Tudor, driven by a 23-year-old college student named Donald Turnipseed. Turnipseed began a left turn across the highway, crossing directly into the path of the oncoming Porsche. He said afterward that he simply never saw the small low car coming at him in the glare. The 2 cars hit almost head-on. The lightweight Porsche was destroyed. Dean suffered a broken neck and massive injuries, and died almost instantly, still in the wreck. He was, by most accounts, gone before help could reach him. His mechanic, Rolf Wuderich, was thrown clear of the car and badly hurt, but he lived. Donald Turnipseed, in the heavier Ford, climbed out dazed, but essentially unharmed. Turnipseed was never charged. A coroner's inquest found no criminal fault, and the young student went home to a quiet life, rarely speaking publicly about the accident that killed a movie star for the rest of his days. There is a grim irony folded into the timing. Only weeks before, Dean had filmed a short highway safety message, sitting easily in front of the camera and warning young drivers to slow down, telling them that the life they saved might be his own. Then he climbed into the fastest car he had ever owned and drove it across California at speed. James Dean had been a movie star for barely a year. The release of Rebel Without a Cause, weeks later, turned a rising actor into a permanent legend, frozen forever at 24, the rebel who died young in a fast car. The myth and the man fused into one image that has never come apart. And then there was the car. The wreckage of the Little Bastard took on a life of its own. The Porsche was sold for parts. The story that grew up around it claimed that almost everyone who touched the remains afterward met with disaster. Mechanics were said to have been injured when its engine and other components were installed in their own race cars. Pieces of it were blamed for accidents and deaths. The car was put on display as a warning about reckless driving, and the legend says it caused trouble even there, falling, injuring people, behaving as if it were cursed. Then the wreck disappeared. At some point while being transported, the remains of the Spider simply vanished, and despite rewards and searches over the decades, the car that killed James Dean has never been found. It is the strangest footnote to one of Hollywood's first great tragedies, a death so famous that even the metal that caused it became a ghost story. It was the afternoon of September 13th, 1982. On a steep, twisting mountain road above Monaco on the French Riviera, Grace Kelly was 52 years old, and she had lived 2 of the most glamorous lives the 20th century could offer. First, she had been a Hollywood star, an Oscar winner with a cool, luminous screen presence, the leading lady of films like Rear Window, High Noon, and To Catch a Thief. Then, at the height of her fame, she had walked away from the movies to marry Prince Rainier III and become Princess Grace of Monaco. The fairy tale had a famous setting. She had filmed To Catch a Thief on these very Riviera roads, racing along the cliffs with Cary Grant, the Mediterranean shining below. That afternoon, she was driving down from Rock Aigle, the family's country estate in the hills, back toward the palace in Monaco. Beside her in the passenger seat was her 17-year-old daughter, Princess Stephanie. It was a short trip, a route the family took constantly, ordinarily with a chauffeur at the wheel. But that day, the back seat of the car was loaded with dresses and boxes, leaving no room for a driver. And so, the accounts say, Grace dismissed her chauffeur and drove the older Rover herself. It was a small decision, the kind no one thinks twice about, and it placed her behind the wheel when her body failed. Partway down the steep, hairpin descent, something went wrong inside her. The medical conclusion was that Grace suffered a stroke at the wheel, a sudden bleed in her brain that took away her control of the car in an instant. The Rover did not slow for the curve. It ran off the mountain road and plunged down the hillside, falling roughly 120 feet before it came to rest. Princess Stephanie, in the passenger seat, survived. She suffered a concussion and a hairline fracture in her neck, and she was hurt badly enough that she could not attend the funeral that followed. Grace was pulled from the wreck alive, but catastrophically injured, with severe trauma to her head. At the hospital, it became clear there was no recovery. She had suffered devastating brain damage, compounded by the stroke that had likely caused the crash in the first place. The following day, with no hope of survival, she was taken off life support. Princess Grace of Monaco was dead, a day after a short drive she had made countless times before. There was a terrible symmetry to where she died. She had played out some of her most famous screen moments behind the wheel on these same cliffside roads, a glamorous star in command of a fast car against a backdrop of sea and sky. To Catch a Thief had practically advertised the danger and the beauty of these heights, the camera leaning out over the drop as she drove. The reality, decades later, was not glamorous at all. It was a stroke, a missed curve, and a 120-foot fall on the very landscape that had helped make her a legend. Her death stunned the world. She had spent more than 2 decades as the picture of Grace, first on the screen and then on a throne, the American girl who became a real princess. Monaco came to a halt for her funeral. The man she had given up Hollywood for, Prince Rainier, never remarried, and was buried beside her when he died years later. In the years after, a rumor took hold and refused to die, the claim that it had not been Grace driving at all, but her teenage daughter Stephanie, and that the family had concealed it. It has never been proven. Stephanie has denied it. The official finding has always been that Grace was at the wheel and a stroke killed her, but the whisper persists, the way such whispers always do around the sudden death of someone famous. A story people tell because the truth, a 52-year-old woman struck down by her own body on a road she knew by heart, feels somehow too plain for a princess. It was April 25, 2002, on a rural road near La Ceiba, on the Caribbean coast of Honduras. Lisa Lopes was 30 years old. To millions of people, she was Left Eye, 1/3 of TLC, the best-selling American girl group of all time. The voice and the wild energy behind songs like Waterfalls and No Scrubs. She was not in Honduras to perform. She had come for a spiritual retreat, about a month away from the noise of fame, traveling with her sister, her brother, and several friends, including members of a singing group she had been mentoring. By this point in her life, Lopes had grown intensely interested in spirituality and self-examination. She wanted to clear her body and her mind, to look for meaning beyond the charts. She had also brought cameras. A documentary film crew was capturing the trip, and Lopes herself often held the camera, filming long, searching diary entries about the kind of person she was trying to become. That decision meant that what happened next would be recorded. She was driving a rented Mitsubishi Montero, a heavy SUV, along the road with several passengers inside. On the road ahead, a truck was stopped or moving slowly. Lopes swerved to avoid it. Then an oncoming car appeared, and she turned sharply again to avoid that. At the speed she was going, the tall SUV could not absorb the second hard maneuver. The Montero went out of control and rolled. It flipped 3 times, struck trees, and threw several of the people inside out through the windows before coming to rest. When it stopped, most of the occupants had survived. Several had been ejected and injured, but they were alive. Lisa Lopes was not. She had been thrown from the vehicle and died instantly from a severe traumatic brain injury. Of everyone in the SUV, she was the only person killed. She was also, investigators noted, the only occupant who had not been wearing a seatbelt. The cameras had been running. The footage from inside the vehicle captured the ordinary moments before the crash and the chaos that followed, and years later, much of it appeared in a VH1 documentary, The Last Days of Left Eye. It is an unsettling thing to watch, a young woman narrating her own search for peace and meaning in the final days and minutes of her life, with the catastrophe waiting just off camera. What lifted the story from tragedy into something stranger was a coincidence that had happened only weeks earlier. Not long before her own death, Lopes had been involved in another accident on the roads of Honduras. A vehicle in her party had struck and fatally injured a young boy who stepped into the road. Lopes had stayed with the dying child, cradling him as they rushed toward help, but the boy did not survive. He was 10 years old. His name was Bayron Fuentes Lopes. The boy who died near her vehicle shared her surname, Lopes. She is said to have been shaken to her core by it, haunted by the sense that death had brushed past her and marked a child with her own name. In the footage filmed during the retreat, she spoke openly about feeling that something was following her, that a presence wanted to take her, and she tried to make spiritual sense of the boy's death and her own growing unease. Weeks later, on another Honduran road, the SUV rolled and she was thrown from it, and the thing she had felt closing in finally arrived. She was 30 years old at the height of her fame, looking for something larger than the music when she found instead the end of everything, with the cameras still running. It was the evening of April 10, 1992, on U.S. Route 95 in the open desert north of Needles, California, near the Nevada line. Sam Kinison was 38 years old, and there was no one else in comedy who sounded remotely like him. He had started as a Pentecostal preacher before he ever set foot on a stage. When he turned to stand-up, he brought the pulpit with him. His act was a controlled explosion, a man screaming truths about love and rage and God until the veins stood out on his neck, then dropping to a whisper. He was profane and furious, and underneath it, a former minister still wrestling with the big questions out loud in front of a crowd. By 1992, his life had finally steadied. After years of hard living, the kind of excess that nearly defined him as much as his act did, Kinison had cleaned up. Friends said he was sober, healthier, and genuinely happy. He had just married Malika Swiri, and the wedding was only days behind him. The crash came as he was driving to one more show, the work he loved, in the middle of what felt like a new beginning. That evening, he was driving from California toward a performance in Laughlin, Nevada, behind the wheel of his Pontiac Trans Am. In the car with him was his new wife. They had been married for exactly 6 days. Coming the other way, down Route 95, was a pickup truck driven by a drunk 17-year-old. The truck drifted across the center line into Kinison's lane and hit his car head-on. Kinison was conscious in the immediate aftermath, lying on the highway, mortally injured. He had suffered a torn aorta and a dislocated neck, the kind of internal damage that gives a person only minutes. His new wife, beside him in the car, survived the crash. And then, according to the people who were there, Sam Kinison did something that no one has ever been able to fully explain. This part comes from witness accounts, not from any official record, and it has been told and retold for decades. Those near him in his last moments said that the dying comedian began to speak clearly, as if he were talking to someone no one else could see. He said, more than once, "I don't want to die." Then he seemed to listen and to answer, as if the other side of the conversation were being given to him directly. His tone changed. The fear left it. He said, softly and calmly, "Okay, okay, and then he was gone. No one can prove what Sam Kinison saw, or whether he saw anything at all in the chaos of a fatal injury. The story is repeated because it fits the man so eerily well, the screaming preacher turned comedian, arguing with the unseen one last time, then making his peace and going quiet. Take it as what it is, a widely told account from the people who were there, not a verified fact. The crash itself left a colder kind of record. Sam Kinison, a comedian who had spent years performing his demons at full volume, was killed by a drunk teenager in the desert. Sober himself, 6 days into a marriage, on his way to make a room full of strangers laugh. The truck that crossed into his lane was reportedly full of beer cans. The young driver who hit him head-on did not go to prison. He was sentenced to probation and community service for the death of one of the most distinctive voices American comedy ever produced. There is something almost unbearable in the arithmetic of it. A man who had finally gotten clean and gotten happy, undone in an instant by someone else's bottle, on a dark highway, with the new ring still bright on his hand.